They say heroes walk among us, unnoticed, uncelebrated, and sometimes even mistreated. Isaac Ike Stokes was one such hero, a veteran who'd risked his life in distant war zones, earning commendations for bravery that few could ever imagine. But when he walked into a bustling convenience store one rainy afternoon, he had no idea his every move was being watched through a prejudiced lens. Within minutes, accusations of fake money would spiral into a life-shattering scandal, leaving Ike handcuffed on the hood of a police cruiser. The story that followed would rattle an entire community and spark a dramatic reckoning unlike anything they'd ever seen. Rain pelted down in thick, heavy droplets, forming small rivers alongside the cracked pavement outside Jimmy's Quick Mart in a middle-class neighborhood of Lexington, Kentucky. It was one of those days where the sky felt weighed down, every cloud pregnant with impending storms. Isaac Ike Stokes pulled his hood low over his forehead to keep the rain from slipping down his neck. He was on his way home from the Department of Veterans Affairs Hospital, where he'd undergone a regular checkup. At 42, his war injuries still ached, some deeper than others, old bullet wounds, the phantom pangs from shrapnel lodged in his leg, and the bruises on his heart that never fully healed. All Ike wanted was a warm drink. He stepped inside the Quick Mart, the aroma of cheap coffee and stale chips hitting him immediately. He exhaled a tired sigh of relief. At least it was dry in there. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, reflecting off the wet tiles. A small queue formed around the single cash register, manned by Janet, a bored college kid flipping through a celebrity magazine. As Ike pulled out a few dollar bills to pay for his coffee, a sense of calm briefly washed over him. This was a mundane, everyday moment, nothing dramatic, nothing special. Exactly the kind of normalcy he'd fought for all those years abroad. But life had other plans that day. Janet glanced at Ike's money, her face twisting with suspicion. Another employee behind the counter, Martin, sidled up next to her. He muttered something under his breath, eyes fixed on the bills in Ike's hand. The casual, harmless transaction was about to spiral into a nightmare none of them could have predicted, forever altering the trajectory of Ike's life. Janet tapped the edge of Ike's $10 bill against the counter, her painted nails clicking noisily. "We've had a lot of fake bills circulating lately," she announced, holding the note up to the light with exaggerated caution. Ike, slightly taken aback, tried to stay calm. He'd heard stories of black men being profiled, especially in certain neighborhoods, but he never imagined it would happen to him here, a place he frequented, often because it was down the street from the VA clinic. Martin, who'd been rummaging under the counter, whipped out a counterfeit detection pen. He scribbled a quick line across the bill, scanning it with hawk-like precision. A moment later, he frowned. "You see that discoloration? This looks off," he stated. He passed the bill to Janet, who nodded, her face seizing with a mix of authority and self-righteousness. Ike tried to protest. "That's real money. I just got it from the ATM near Fort Bragg when I visited a friend last week." But Janet and Martin wouldn't hear it. The other customers in the store shifted uncomfortably, some throwing Ike apologetic glances, others pulled out their phones, anticipating some commotion worth capturing. "I'm sorry, sir," Janet said, not sounding sorry at all, "but we have to take precautions." Martin lifted his chin. "We're calling the cops." Ike's heart thudded in his chest. All he wanted was a simple cup of coffee. Now he stood there, drenched in the fluorescent glare, as a handful of gawkers pulled out their phones to record. He considered leaving, but he also knew running, or even just walking away, might complicate things. The store manager, a middle-aged man named Clive, appeared from the back, curiosity piqued by the unfolding drama. He took one look at Ike, whispered with Janet and Martin, then reached for his phone, his lips set in a grim line. Ike's mind whirled. He reminded himself that he had done nothing wrong. "Stay calm," he told himself. This is just another test, like the ones he faced in Afghanistan. Only the battlefield now was a neighborhood convenience store on a rainy afternoon. Little did he know, the oncoming storm was about to rage far more fiercely than he could ever have imagined. 15 minutes later, red and blue lights danced across the store windows, illuminating the aisles of candy bars and packaged bread. Officers Marion Lansing and Ted Coleman stepped inside, scanning the scene. Lansing, a short woman with a rigid posture, locked eyes on Ike immediately. Coleman stood to her right, taller but less certain, his eyes darting around the store. Janet hurried forward, practically thrusting the $10 bill in Lansing's face. "Look at this," she insisted. Fake as a $3 bill. Ike raised his hand slightly, palms facing outward. "Officer, this is all a misunderstanding. That money is real." "I have the receipt from the ATM," he explained, trying not to sound defensive, but the tremor in his voice was undeniable. Lansing glanced at the note, then at Ike, suspicion anchoring heavily on her brow. "Sir, I'll need to see your ID," she demanded. Ike complied, pulling out his wallet, which was still damp from the rain. She scrutinized his driver's license, flicking her gaze from the photo to his face. "Are you from around here?" she asked. "Born and raised in Louisville," he answered, "but I moved back after I was discharged." "Discharged from what?" Lansing probed. "USARMY. I served in the 75th Ranger Regiment." "Received a Silver Star and a Purple Heart," Ike replied softly. It wasn't something he usually boasted about, but in that moment he hoped it might afford him some respect or understanding. Coleman's eyes flashed with a glimmer of recognition. That's impressive, but Lansing seemed unmoved. "Step outside," she ordered, hooking her fingers in a come-here gesture. Rain slapped against the sidewalk as Ike followed the officers out. A crowd had gathered, drawn by the swirl of lights and the allure of possible scandal. Ike felt a mixture of humiliation and fear surging in his chest. Despite having faced enemy fire, landmines and mortar attacks in war zones, he'd never felt quite as vulnerable as he did at that moment, stuck in the crosshairs of suspicion. Outside, Lansing instructed Ike to place his hands on the patrol car's hood. The cold metal stung his palms, and he shivered under the relentless downpour. Cars crept by, drivers craning their necks to glimpse the unfolding scene. Ike tried to keep his breathing even, his jaw clenched tight. "Any weapons?" Lansing asked. "Just a pocket knife in my backpack," Ike answered quietly. He had carried that knife as a good luck charm since his last deployment. She yanked the bag from his shoulder, unzipping it to rummage through. Meanwhile, Coleman patted Ike down, his movements not overly aggressive, but certainly methodical. They found nothing suspicious. Lansing tossed the pocket knife aside on the passenger seat. Then she gave Coleman a brief nod before turning to Ike. "We're taking you in for questioning about counterfeit currency," she said, voice cold and clipped. Ike felt an icy knot form in his stomach. "But it's real," he insisted, a note of desperation creeping into his tone. "It's from the ATM. You can check. Call the bank. Look at the security tape." His pleas fell on deaf ears. Lansing grabbed her handcuffs and snapped them around Ike's wrists. An uneasy hush fell over the onlookers. A couple of them had been filming from the moment the squad car pulled up. Ike thought he saw a flash of concern on Coleman's face, but the junior officer said nothing to contradict his partner. As Lansing pushed Ike into the back of the patrol car, the reality hit him like a sucker punch. He was being arrested in public for a crime he didn't commit. War hero or not, this was the sort of place where uniform meant guilt for some. A wave of nausea hit as the engine roared to life, whisking him away from that drenched parking lot and into a deeper storm of injustice. At the local police station, Ike's world turned upside down. His belongings, phone, wallet, and the worn dog tags that bore the names of fallen comrades were locked away. One by one, the humiliations stacked up, mugshot, fingerprinting, a rough pat down that made him grit his teeth. He answered questions about his employment unemployed, living on his army pension though he was starting a job hunt, his address, and his military service. No matter how much he repeated that the money was real, the officers recorded his statement with detached interest. Lansing left the interrogation room, letting two different detectives take over. Ike sat under the harsh fluorescent lighting, the smell of stale coffee and bleach clogging his senses. His mind replayed the day's events, the rain, the store, the suspicious glances, the cameras. He wondered if any of the footage would help him, or if it would simply get lost in the swirling tides of social media. A middle-aged detective named Padilla flipped open a worn notebook. "So you claim you're a decorated war hero," he said skeptically, glancing at Ike's file. "Silver Star, Purple Heart, a couple of other commendations. That's no small feat." Ike swallowed. "Yes, I served in Afghanistan, Iraq. The money is real. I just withdrew it from my bank account recently." Padilla glanced at his partner, Detective Myers, who rubbed his chin, seeming less convinced. "We see a lot of cases where people try to pass off small counterfeit bills," Myers said. "They figure less suspicion than passing hundreds." Ike felt anger surge. "With all due respect, I'm not your typical suspect. If you'd verify the bills, you'd know they're legitimate." Padilla leaned forward, clasping his hands. There was a hint of uncertainty in his expression. "Look, if the money checks out, you'll be out of here soon enough." Ike exhaled, his heart still pounding. He could only hope that the system would move quickly to confirm he was no criminal. Word about Ike's arrest spread through a local veterans Facebook group like wildfire. By nightfall, one of Ike's old army buddies, Jose Ramirez, stormed into the police station, demanding to speak to someone in charge. Ramirez had served with Ike at Fort Bragg, back when they trained for missions that seemed impossible to most civilians. He knew Ike's moral code, his unwavering loyalty, his sense of honor. "We want answers," Ramirez said, raising his voice at the desk sergeant. "You got an innocent man in lockup on false charges." The sergeant made a show of flipping through some paperwork. "It's an ongoing investigation," he replied tersely. Meanwhile, Ike was transferred to a holding cell with half a dozen men who smelled of stale sweat and cheap liquor. The overhead light buzzed, flickering ominously every now and then. He sat on a cold steel bench, arms wrapped around himself for comfort. Thoughts of his wife, Denise, and their teenage daughter, Layla, crashed over him in waves of shame and worry. Had they heard the news? Would someone contact them before he could call? As if on cue, an officer called Ike's name. It was Coleman, the junior officer from earlier, who now looked ill at ease. "You got a phone call," he mumbled, unlocking the cell. Ike felt no relief, only a grim determination as he followed Coleman down the corridor, ignoring the echo of catcalls from the other detainees. Once Ike had the phone receiver in hand, Ramirez's voice crackled on the other end, thick with concern. "Hey man," Ramirez said, "hang in there. We're going to get you out." Ike's shoulders sagged. He pressed a hand against the wall to steady himself. "They're charging me with possessing counterfeit money," he replied. "Can you contact my wife? She already knows," Ramirez assured him. "Denise is calling a lawyer right now. We'll prove they messed up big time." For the first time since his arrest, Ike felt a spark of hope. He'd weathered insurgent ambushes, mortar attacks, and IED blasts. Surviving an unjust arrest was just another mission he'd have to endure, though the sting of betrayal cut deeper in his own backyard than it ever did on foreign soil. Denise Stokes was no stranger to crisis. Married to a military man for nearly 2 decades, she had faced the torment of not knowing if her husband would return from the battlefield. But this felt different. This was happening in their own country at the hands of their own authorities. Outraged, she marched into the police station with her shoulders squared and her eyes aflame. Her presence alone seemed to part the sea of uniformed officers behind the desk. She demanded to speak to Ike, only to be informed that visiting hours were over. "It's after midnight," the desk sergeant said, half apologetically. "You'll have to wait until morning." Denise's jaw tightened. "This is insane. He didn't do anything wrong," she seethed. Before leaving, she confronted Coleman in the hallway. "My husband fought for this country. He has a Purple Heart from Iraq," she said, tears mingling with fury in her eyes. Coleman looked uneasy. The weight of public pressure had started to shift something inside him. "I know, ma'am," he said quietly, "but it's protocol. We have to follow orders." Denise clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms until they left red crescent marks. Protocol. That word was a shield for injustice, a way to pass the buck without taking responsibility. She spun on her heel and walked out, determined to use every resource at her disposal to clear Ike's name. By morning, half the town seemed to know the story. A local activist group caught wind of Ike's detention. Footage from the Quick Mart, recorded by a bystander, exploded on social media, showing Ike being handcuffed in the rain, protesting that the money was real, and the stunned onlookers murmuring in shock. Within hours, #FreeIkeStokes was trending on Twitter, with veterans from all over the country chiming in to share Ike's service record and demand justice. News vans started popping up outside the police station, their satellite dishes piercing the storm clouds overhead. A determined reporter from WKYT, the local Lexington station, cornered the police chief, Matthew Hornsby, during a press conference about a completely unrelated case. "Chief Hornsby, what do you have to say about the arrest of Isaac Stokes, a decorated Army veteran accused of using counterfeit money?" Hornsby, blindsided by the question, stammered, "We're investigating the matter. We take allegations of counterfeit currency seriously." When pressed about Ike's military record, the chief simply repeated a canned response, "We'll look into all the facts." Inside the station, tension brewed. Coleman felt uneasy. Lansing remained resolute, convinced she'd done the right thing. Among the rank and file, whispered conversations spread. "You hear that guy was a war hero?" "Nah, that can't be right. We get con artists claiming to be vets all the time. But I saw the news. He's legit." Truth was, the department wasn't ready for the media backlash, nor the moral condemnation that was gathering like a storm beyond their walls. While Ike spent a sleepless night on a cramped cell bench, two detectives pored over the Quick Mart surveillance tapes. Sure enough, the footage showed Ike calmly purchasing his coffee with a $10 bill. Another camera at the register captured Martin using the counterfeit pen, and a close-up that hinted the detection line never changed color the way it typically would with genuine counterfeit notes. More tellingly, a second detective traced Ike's financial records. Phone calls to the bank revealed that Ike had withdrawn cash from an ATM near Fort Bragg only a few days prior. With each revelation, the suspicion about Ike's fake money began to crumble. Still, red tape slowed the process. It wasn't enough to simply see that the pen mark might have been misread. Official channels needed to confirm with the Secret Service or specialized labs about the bill's authenticity. Meanwhile, Ike remained behind bars. His lawyer, Janine Patterson, was already filing for bail, but the system churned slowly. Throughout that second night in jail, Ike's mind drifted to memories he'd tried hard to bury, pinned down by gunfire in Kandahar, the day a fellow soldier saved his life but lost his own. The roaring of helicopter blades overhead, dust storms choking his lungs, and the relentless heat that felt like standing in a furnace. He remembered the day he and Ramirez narrowly escaped an IED explosion, the thunder of the blast still echoing in his nightmares. Jail was different, but the feeling of not being in control, of having your fate rest in other people's hands, mirrored some of the worst aspects of warfare. There was no bulletproof vest here, no rallying comrades to pick him up if he fell. It was just him, isolated from his family, pinned under the weight of an injustice that could ruin his future. He tried to focus on his daughter's face, Layla, with her big, curious eyes and warm smile. How would she cope, hearing her father was behind bars for something he didn't do? One of the corrections officers called for lights out, plunging the cell into darkness. Ike's eyes lingered on the small window high up on the wall, the street lamps outside casting faint shadows. He prayed that justice would come, that he'd soon be free to hug his family again. On the morning of Ike's bail hearing, Janine Patterson presented the overwhelming evidence of Ike's innocence. She provided proof of his decorated military service, legitimate bank records, and a letter from the bank confirming that the $10 bill Ike used was dispensed from their ATM. Despite the prosecutor's initial reluctance, the judge, an older man named Richard Delgado, found the evidence compelling. He was a veteran himself, having served in the Marine Corps decades ago. "This is a travesty," Judge Delgado remarked. "I see no reason to hold Mr. Stokes any longer." He set Ike's bail at a nominal amount, and Patterson handed over the check on the spot. Ike walked out to see Denise and Ramirez waiting in the corridor, relief and anger warring on their faces. Denise threw her arms around him, tears staining her cheeks. Ramirez clapped him on the shoulder. Outside, cameras clicked, and reporters jostled for a quote. Ike felt the onslaught of attention like a physical force, but he was too drained to respond. "I just want to go home," he told them, voice subdued. Denise took his hand, guiding him away from the chaos. As evidence of Ike's innocence grew undeniably clear, the Lexington Police Department faced a public relations crisis. People from all walks of life, veterans, civil rights activists, and everyday citizens demanded accountability. Officer Lansing, in particular, took the brunt of the criticism for her aggressive role in the arrest. Online forums lit up with heated debates about racial profiling, abuse of authority, and the illusions of justice. Some officers defended Lansing, claiming she was just doing her job. But Internal Affairs launched an investigation, combing through body cam footage and interviewing witnesses. The Quick Mart staff, particularly Janet and Martin, weren't spared either. Their casual accusations had triggered a chain of events that put an innocent man behind bars. Within days, Chief Hornsby held a press conference in a bid to quell the growing outrage. Standing before a cluster of microphones, he offered a carefully worded statement. "We regret the inconvenience and distress caused to Mr. Isaac Stokes, a decorated military veteran, and his family. The Lexington Police Department strives to serve and protect all members of our community without prejudice. We take these allegations of misconduct seriously and have opened a formal investigation." The word inconvenience made Ike's stomach churn when he watched the press conference from home. An inconvenience was a long wait at the DMV, not several days in jail on false charges. Many shared his indignation. Social media exploded with the sentiment that the apology was too little, too late. Just when it seemed things couldn't get more dramatic, a bombshell dropped. An audit of Jimmy's Quick Mart revealed multiple incidents where minority customers had been falsely accused of theft or fraud. A local investigative journalist, Ashley Simmons, uncovered that Martin, the clerk who called the police, had a history of racially charged complaints against him. With each revelation, the store's reputation took a massive hit. Clive, the manager, was forced to resign when text messages showed him encouraging staff to keep an eye on certain types of customers. Meanwhile, Officer Lansing's past cases came under scrutiny. Complaints emerged of her using questionable justification for searching vehicles driven by people of color. As the Internal Affairs investigation mounted, Lansing was suspended without pay pending further disciplinary action. Coleman, the younger officer, cooperated fully, revealing that he'd always been uncomfortable with how quickly Lansing had escalated the situation at the Quick Mart. This cooperation led to him receiving only a minor reprimand, though his conscience was far from clear. The city was abuzz. Some celebrated what they saw as long overdue accountability. Others lamented the entire situation as an ugly stain on the community. Either way, the tides had turned. Ike found a strange sense of validation, though it did little to erase the trauma of being handcuffed and locked up like a criminal. While Ike navigated legal channels to seek redress, good news finally arrived in the form of a heartfelt letter from Secretary of Defense Rhett James Mattis, commending him for his service and expressing personal outrage at his mistreatment. "No soldier who has risked his life for our nation deserves to be treated this way," Mattis wrote. The letter didn't magically solve everything, but it was a beacon of dignity after a long, dark tunnel. Community leaders rallied around Ike, hosting a fundraiser to help cover his legal expenses. More than just money, the event was a symbolic gesture of solidarity, a way to say, "We stand with you." Veterans of every branch came to shake Ike's hand, offering brotherhood and gratitude. Civil rights activists joined hands with old war buddies. Local politicians saw an opportunity to promise reforms and vow that no one else would endure what Ike had. One of the biggest twists came when a forensic expert publicly confirmed that the $10 bill was, in fact, completely legitimate. In a televised statement, the expert said, "It's quite clear that the convenience store staff either mishandled the counterfeit pen test or deliberately misconstrued the results." Then, an even bigger shock. Security footage revealed that Janet, the Quick Mart cashier, had sold snack items earlier that day for a counterfeit $20 bill passed by a different customer. Long gone. That could have been the impetus behind her heightened suspicion, or perhaps her guilt in letting one counterfeit slip by. The irony was overwhelming. Ike's money was real, and somewhere out there, an actual counterfeiter had breezed through their store with zero scrutiny. As the evidence stacked up, Ike's lawyer prepared to file a civil lawsuit against the Lexington Police Department and the Quick Mart chain for wrongful arrest, negligence, and defamation. The word settlement began to float around in hush-hush conversations. Ike wasn't after a giant payday, but he was determined that something good should come out of all this pain. If it could help his family and also deter future incidents, it felt like a moral necessity. Weeks passed, and slowly, life in Lexington found a semblance of normalcy. Ike attended therapy sessions at the VACLINIC, where he talked through the flashbacks not just of war, but of the nightmarish arrest. It was surreal to realize he felt more threatened on his home turf than he ever did in foreign combat zones. Denise noticed changes in him. He startled easily, sometimes staring out the window for long periods, lost in thought, but she also saw a growing resolve. "They can't take away who I am," he told her one evening. "I won't let them break me." She squeezed his hand, feeling a surge of pride and empathy. Layla, their daughter, wrestled with new fears. "Dad, how do I know this won't happen to me?" she asked. Ike tried to offer reassurance. "You have to believe in change, sweetheart. This country still has good people in it. We just have to make sure those good people stand up when it counts." Several months later, the lawsuit reached its conclusion. Under the weight of damning evidence and public pressure, Quick Mart and the Lexington Police Department settled. Ike received a substantial compensation package, not millions, but enough to secure his family's future, fund local community initiatives, and make a statement. Official statements from both entities acknowledged lapses in judgment and committed to retraining efforts that would reduce racial profiling and ensure better handling of suspected counterfeit cases. Officer Lansing resigned just weeks before the department's final disciplinary ruling, effectively ending her law enforcement career. Janet and Martin at Quick Mart also faced severe repercussions. The store decided not to renew their employment. It was a stark demonstration of karma, a direct consequence of their hasty, prejudiced actions. Ike used part of his settlement to establish a non-profit aimed at bridging the gap between veterans and law enforcement, focusing on cultural sensitivity training and mental health resources. He called it the Heroes Homefront Initiative, an homage to the place where war might end, but struggles too often continue. In the end, Ike emerged from the ordeal changed, but not defeated. He learned that courage wasn't just about facing an enemy's gun barrel, it was also about confronting injustice within one's own homeland. Though the memory of standing in the rain, cuffed and powerless, would never fully fade, it was a chapter he survived, a chapter that might help rewrite the narrative for those who came after him. Thank you for watching this emotionally charged story about Isaac Ike Stokes, the decorated war hero wrongly accused of using counterfeit money. His journey through suspicion, wrongful arrest, and an eventual path to justice is both a cautionary tale and an inspiring example of resilience. It reminds us that injustice can happen anywhere, even to those who have risked their lives in service of their country. Ultimately, Ike's determination to clear his name and hold those responsible accountable shows the power of truth, community support, and unyielding courage. If you found this story compelling, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your engagement helps us bring you more powerful narratives that shine a light on both the best and worst aspects of our world, and it's a way for all of us to stand together for justice and understanding.